Welcome back from the morning break. Our next submitter is Luck Farms Limited, and I think we have Mr. Sanson. And I think all your witnesses are also online. I see a number of faces on the screen here.
Yep. Everyone's online. So the batting order will actually be Mr. Ryan first, Gareth Taylor, John Sturgis, and then myself. So you'll hear from everyone online first, and then I'll go last.
Okay, I think what might be helpful is just to give us a quick overview of what Luck Farms is, its location, and I think it's set out in the submission, but perhaps one of your presenters could just give us a quick overview.
John, I think that's best coming from you, about your site and property and where it is and what you do.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Stuart Ryan's my name. Am I coming through okay at your end?
Yes, you are, and I will. Yeah.
Look, thank you very much. Perhaps if I could just provide a brief overview. There's been a number of documents that have been filed overnight, adds to the material before you, and your and your very efficient hearing secretary appears to have loaded those to the website. There are a number of documents which have been exchanged, and I'm not sure if this is visible to you on the screen.
Yes.
Yep.
And so attached is a plan simply outlining the boundaries of the Luck interests. So Mr. Sturgis, John Sturgis, seated beside me, his family, and he and his wife, the directors of Luck Farm Limited. That owns the majority of the interests, and there are some related family interests which Luck also manages. That's some properties adjacent to the Rangiputa side of the map. To the ocean side is Puhiki or Pufeki beach, and between the beach, that's the area covered and uncovered by the tide, is a marginal strip. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but which is just to the north of the red line. So that is the subject property, of course, located within the Kari Peninsula. And there will be some other maps which we'll address in terms of the content of submissions. But just very briefly, just to orientate you to the mapping issues, which I'll speak to, there's some regional policy statement mapping, which is identified in the orange shading in the slide shown attached. And there is also some mapping in the proposed district plan in terms of outstanding landscapes and outstanding natural character that we'll come to, which affect the coastal frontage and part of, or which affect the marginal strip in the site. If I can just kick off in terms of orientating you to the issues. So there are two issues, Commissioners. There's the first issue is vehicles in the coastal environment overlay, and that is submission 585. And that came in as a late submission, I think in early November in 2022. And in the minute number 2, that late submission was allowed, and it replaced an earlier submission numbered 550. Just to be avoid any confusion there. The other submission which I wish to address is the submission 551, which relates to overlays and mapping. So there's 2 issues relating to the coastal environment zone which the submitter advances. If I can just step you through the issues as I see them, and then I will hand over to the witnesses. Is that coming through clearly?
We can see you and hear you quite clearly. Obviously, can you see and hear us?
We can indeed, thank you.
And we're happy to be guided by you and how you want to present your witnesses to us and the material for us. So we're pretty much in your hands.
Okay, thanks very much. Just in terms of the witnesses, we've got Dr. Gareth Taylor online. Gareth Taylor's an ecologist, has a PhD in ecology, has exchanged a written statement of evidence, I think dated the 22nd of July. And there is a short summary statement of Dr. Taylor's evidence, which he will speak to. There's also John Sturgis seated beside me, and John will speak to his statement of evidence dated the 2nd of August, and there's a couple of maps and plans which are in a paginated bundle, which we will refer to, which is loaded on the website under the additional hearing material tab. And we've also got in the room Steve Sanson, who you've met and know well, and Mr. Sanson will address you in terms of the planning issues that I'll touch on in terms of opening. So that's sort of a bit of a roll call of the issues for the submitter. Could I just start off with the vehicles on coastal environment issue and step you through that issue?
Thank you.
The starting point, the first point for me as a lawyer in terms of starting point is what are the boundaries of the land which the district seeks to manage in the district plan? And there's an issue both to the seaward and the landward extent of that boundary. And starting with the seaward extent, in the additional materials that I've circulated, there is a document called the Local Government Boundary Alteration Notice. And if I'm sharing screens appropriately in terms of teams, I've just attached a copy of this boundary alteration notice, and it relates to the seaward boundaries of territorial authorities. And in 2011, by way of notice published in the New Zealand Gazette, the boundaries of a number of territorial authorities were amended to extend to mean low spring tides. And I've highlighted the relevant section of the local government boundary alteration notice. And just scrolling through that document, districts with extended seaward boundaries aligning to mean low water springs include Far North, Kaipara, I think Whangarei might have already been aligned, and Far North District appears to be mentioned a couple of times. And there's also of interest a couple of harbours which are also addressed in a schedule, including Paringaringa and Hauhura Harbour and Ranganui Harbour. So I just raise that in terms of addressing you at the outset of first issue, what are the boundaries that the district plan is seeking to manage? And the proposition that I have for you is that the land of the district extends to low mean spring tides. And therefore, when one comes to manage land, that should extend to low mean spring tides. And I come to this point later when we talk about the overlays and alignment with the regional policy statement. The second point that I wish to raise with you is that the issue is that the second point is that beaches are roads in the Far North District. And this is a point that it's addressed at paragraph 35 of my written legal submissions. And I don't want to laboriously go through those, but just in terms of referencing that point, within the Local Government Act, council exercises, that's Far North District Council exercises the powers of a road controlling authority. And as a road controlling authority, under the Land Transport Act, at paragraph 35 of the submissions, a road is defined in a way in the Land Transport Act to extend to beaches. That term is not defined in the LTA, but council has adopted a series of bylaws in 2022, which fulfill its functions as a road controlling authority, RCA. And the bylaws adopted by Far North District Council are at tab 21, page 154. It's tab 21, page 154 of the supplementary material. So in the additional bundle of material, there is a paginated bundle, and at tab 21, there is a copy of the bylaws for Far North District. They seem to just be escaping me somewhere.
Can you click on the main screen? 21 on there. Can you click on that?
Yeah. So the bylaws are at page 154 of the document. Looks like our pagination is a little bit off. I see they're paginated on the bottom right-hand side. So the bylaw promulgated by Far North District Council has a chapter part 8 in relation to vehicles on beaches, and at clause 28 there's a restriction in terms of the use of vehicles on beaches. However, when one comes to look at those provisions in clause 28, there are no restrictions apart from any beach identified in the schedules. And when one turns to the schedules of the bylaw, the only beach that is regulated is Cooper's Beach. So there's a schedule. I'm sorry, I'm just scrolling through this. Is a schedule at page 179 of the paginated bundle, and that correlates with the beach on which vehicles are prohibited within the district. So the proposition is that when one comes to apply policy 20 of the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, then there is no, the point is that there is no control on beaches in the district, that's the district extending to Low Water Springs, because there's only one beach which is regulated in the bylaws. And the third point is that council, of course, has the obligation to give effect to the various policy instruments, and those give effect to obligations, which I've noted at paragraph 24 of the written submissions, include the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement and Policy 20, which relates to the control of the use of vehicles. And I advance the proposition in submissions that control involves the exercise of some control or restriction. And in addition to policy 20, there's the natural character policies, in particular in relation to natural character at policy 13 and at policy 15 in terms of natural landscapes. And of course, those policies, it'll be well familiar to you, have avoidance policies so that if adverse effects are to be avoided on areas that are identified as outstanding, which is the issue that we deal with when we come to the mapping overlays. Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, I have read the memorandum from Council Solicitor Mr. Fisher, and I caught part of the exchange that the panel had this morning with Mr. Williams for Forest and Bird. So I've sort of generally got the thrust of the issues relating to the SNA point, and I might be doing a disservice, but if I'm understanding Mr. Fisher's advice to the panel, he seems to be saying that the council is effectively off the hook when it comes to mapping SNAs, and it's clear that there might be some twists and turns to come out of the amendment to the RMA. However, it seems that regardless of the SNA mapping issue, in my respectful submission, council is not off the hook, but remains on the hook in terms of giving effect to the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, and in particular the mandatory obligations in policies 13, 15, and in terms of control of vehicles in policy 20. We'll come to the evidence of Mr. Sturgis and Gareth Taylor shortly, but the proposition advanced from that evidence is that there's damage occurring to outstanding natural character landscapes and outstanding natural landscapes, which are partially mapped in the district and mapped in the RPS, but which are not being given effect to or implemented through the absence of a rule controlling vehicles in the coastal environment overlay. And the issue has arisen. There's been a bit of a history to control of vehicles on beaches in the Northland Regional Plan. And the sequence is a bit of it's unfolded in the sense that Lucklaw made a submission through the Far North Plan process in October 2022. Shortly after making that submission, Lucklaw learned of appeals that were long-standing to the Northland Regional Plan, and those appeals had been running before the Environment Court for something like 3 years and involved multiple parties, including, as you would expect, all of the usual candidates, the district councils, some iwi groups, Department of Conservation, and conservation rate related interests. And Lucklaw was late to the party. So Lucklaw joined those appeals on the premise, on condition that it didn't disrupt or upset the existing settlement arrangements that had been negotiated. And those arrangements took force in the form of a consent order from the Environment Court, which is the decision which is referred to in the bundle of documents and in the written submissions. This is the Bay of Islands Maritime Park case, which is at tab 18, page 97 of the bundle documents. And in tab 97, sorry, page number 97 of the bundle, the regional council has mapped various vehicle exclusion zone maps, and there are 3 maps attached to the back of the court's consent order, which I'll just scroll through. Hopefully you can see those on the screen. And the upshot is that there's now a rule in the regional plan which extends in respect of these identified vehicle exclusion zone beaches, which purport to give effect to policy 20, but which the Environment Court acknowledges at paragraph 34 of its decision only extends to mean high water springs. So that was the trade-off that Lucklaw had to agree to in order to join those appeals. So there's now an operative regional rule for vehicles on beaches, and that rule is attached to the court's consent order and also in the materials in front of you. And so what the relief sought by Lucklaw was to have a rule that is same or similar as a coastal rule in the Bay of Plenty. That coastal rule in the Bay of Plenty was used as the template for the VEZ rule in Northland. And in terms of jurisdiction, the submission sought relief that is same or similar, i.e. resembles the Bay of Plenty rule. And here it's my proposition that the VEZ rule in the Northland Plan resembles the Bay of Plenty rule. It's got a general list of standards or conditions that apply to all beaches, and then there are additional restrictions that apply to beaches that are mapped or identified as VEZ beaches. And so the drafting proposition is that the regional council's VEZ rule be applied with all necessary amendments to be applied to the circumstances of the district. And forgive me for a legalism, but I think the phrase is apply mutatis mutandis, which is with all necessary amendments. So there's a schedule attached to the written legal submissions for the submitter. And unfortunately, I think that some of the tracking disappeared in the process of converting that to PDF. But there's a schedule which I filed overnight, which should contain the relief sought by the or suggested by the submitter. So if you can see this on the screen in front of you, there should be a screen with a schedule and some text in red, which has
Okay, so just 1 minute, Mr. Ryan. We're all earnestly trying to keep up with this. This schedule that you're referring to has only just been submitted. It's not in the bundle that was submitted earlier,
It's at the end of the legal submission.
or is it at the end of your legal submissions?
yeah.
Oh, it is. It's at the end of your legal submissions.
Yes, that's correct, Commissioner. So the schedule is at the back of the submissions,
Okay.
and I think in converting it to PDF, some of the color and the objective and policy remained, but the tracking was obliterated, unfortunately.
I see. It's just. I see. Okay, I understand.
So I've recirculated a schedule as a standalone document, which I think has been uploaded to the website overnight, and the tracking in the rule is intended to show the departure from the text to the regional plan. So in other words, I've struck out the words foreshore and seabed and replaced it with the words beach and adjoining public land within the coastal environment. And similarly, in terms of rule structure, the intent is that clauses 1 through to 6 will apply to all beaches, which is a similar structure to the Bay of Plenty rule, but that clause 7 apply to mapped VEZ beaches. And I've shown in tracking the departure from the regional plan. And I should say and would emphasise that the intent here is to make all necessary amendments to fit with the architecture and format of the district plan. So I acknowledge that there may well be some additional changes that the district would wish to make, but the proposition advanced really is that the regional council has done all the legwork in terms of identifying relevant beaches through the VEZ mapping, and the task would remain for the district council to map the landward extent of the VEZ, which in the submission 585 extends to all of the beach profile, including the dune system. Now, Mr. Sanson will address you further. Mr. Sanson will address you further in relation to the drafting and how that will fit in with the intended framework of the district plan, and acknowledge here that some of these matters affect issues that you are yet to decide or may yet to hear evidence on. But essentially that's the proposition for the submitter. And then I just wanted to close briefly in relation to the regional policy statement issue. And then after hearing very briefly from me on that, we'll hand over to witnesses. So in terms of the RPS issue and mapping issue, this is submission 551. And the issue here is that the mapping in the district plan in terms of character and natural landscape overlays is not aligned with the mapping in the RPS, and the submitter would wish to have the mapping aligned with the RPS mapping, both in terms of natural character and outstanding natural landscapes. So if I'm sharing my screen correctly, you should be able to see a map with the RPS mapping for Pūwheki Beach, and the sort of light browny coloured overlay is the outstanding natural character mapped in the RPS, and that extends from both low water springs to the back of the dunes and extends slightly into the farm paddocks. And that's the light browny colour, and then the shaded, I beg your pardon, the stripes is the outstanding natural landscapes, and that appears to extend from mean high water springs to encompass most of the marginal strip and some of the back of the dunes, and extending into the farmland. Now the issue here is that when we come to turn to the district plan, that the mapping in the district plan doesn't correlate with the RPS. So if I toggle on and off the landscape classifications, if I can show this correctly, ONC 44 on Pūwheki Beach extends to the marginal strip and extends over part of the farmland, but it does not extend to the fore dunes, nor does it extend to the land covered and uncovered by the tide. So the issue here is that the ONC mapping respectfully is not aligned with the RPS, which of course the district is required to give effect to in terms of section 75 of the Act. And the same applies in part to the outstanding natural landscape classification, where again there isn't an alignment between the ONL classification and the ONC classification in the RPS. So that the outcome that the submitter seeks is to have the district mapping on ONL and ONC aligned with the RPS mapping. Hopefully that explains clearly the outcomes that are sought. And at this point, I'll stop speaking and hand over to witnesses. First, Dr. Taylor, followed by Mr. Sturgis, and I'll be guided by you, Commissioners. You may wish to answer any points with me now or later at your leisure.
Yes, possibly if we could just ask a couple of questions now, just to sort of follow you on. I mean, we're looking on the screen at some mapping, and it's sometimes it's difficult to read the screen properly. But
Yes.
it seems to me that the RPS mapping is a little bit more extensive than the district plan mapping. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So the RPS mapping extends from low mean spring tide and extends to the back of the dunes and extending into the farmland.
So your client is seeking the RPS mapping, which is more extensive than the district plan mapping.
That's correct. And the issue appears to be acknowledged in the staff report. And while the submitter's main focus, of course, is its own land, it appears in part to be a generic issue, or it affects mapping across the district. So the relief sought in the submission, in my submission, is wide enough to address the outcome sought, not only in terms of the submitter's property, but align the mapping more generally.
Okay, thank you. I've got that. Any questions, clarification, as we're following?
No, I just had a couple of questions, Mr. Ryan, or maybe a couple of comments, just looking at the drafting of those provisions.
Yes.
Terminology, conditional use of vehicles. That seems to me that conditional is not a good term to use. And then what you're promoting, or what you're seeking there, is control by way of exception clauses. It seems almost that there needs to be just a clause that actually prevents the vehicle use of vehicles on beaches, rather than one that runs through something like 6 or 7 different provisos or exceptions to the general rule. I mean, I can see someone trying to stop someone driving a vehicle along the beach and saying, well, look here, now you're clashing with rule number 6 sort of style, which says you can't do this or that.
Yes.
And I just flag it now because your witnesses might want to do it, but I don't see that vehicles themselves drive over salt marsh, etc. They get driven over those areas, don't they?
Mr. Stanson might like to address this, but in terms of your proposition, your first proposition, Commissioner, should there be a general restriction or prohibition rather than these detailed prescriptions? Look, I agree there could be a general discretionary activity rule. However, the rule structure in both the Bay of Plenty and in the Northland Regional Plan have adopted this kind of permissive approach where in clauses 1 through to 6, it's permitted provided you don't do 1 through to 6. And then in addition, there's these additional restrictions in clause 7 where beaches are mapped as vehicle exclusion zone beaches. And I mean, I acknowledge the point that you're making, that it might be simply to have a general discretionary activity rule. That would be another way of addressing the issue. However, there are issues in terms of efficiency of administration, and it would seem to the submitter and in discussion with Mr. Sanson that there is some benefit of having district rules which are aligned in terms of rule structure with the NRC rules. And in that way, there can be appropriate transfer of functions between district and region so that both district and region can between themselves efficiently administer a rule set which has a similar framework.
Yeah, I accept that. Yeah, another forum I might be arguing the other way, so I accept what you're saying. There is an efficient process in carrying it out that way, and the drafting is something that can be looked at a later stage anyway, but I just raised this at the moment, but thanks for your response.
Thank you.
Any other clarification questions? Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Ryan. We'll move on now to your next witness, your first witness.
Thank you. If I could then call Dr. Taylor. Dr. Taylor has a written statement of evidence dated the 22nd of July and has exchanged a short summary statement. Dr. Taylor, would you please confirm the contents of your written statement of evidence dated the 22nd of July?
Yep, that's right.
And briefly, your qualifications, Dr. Taylor, are?
So I hold a PhD in environmental science, as well as being a certified environmental practitioner.
Thank you. could you please address your summary statement?
Thank you, Stuart. So my intent's to read through my summary statement and then open for questions if that works for the panel. So my full name's Gareth Foley Taylor. I'm a director of a collaborations, which is an environmental consultancy, and hold a PhD in environmental science. I've worked as an environmental scientist with a focus on environmental management for over 12 years. My PhD studies in particular are of relevance to the issues posed by Lucklaw Farms, in that my thesis examined the effects of vehicles on sand beach systems, and included a detailed review of management systems for vehicles used around the world. Of particular note with my thesis was it was particularly focused on tuatua as a focal species, however did review aspects associated with native flora and fauna in Pegasus Bay at the time. I provided the following summary of my evidence as below. So Lucklaw Farms has commissioned a number of studies which I've relied on. One such study was completed by myself and others by Boffa as part of the Northland Regional Plan process that Lucklaw Farms engaged in. The Boffa reports identify a number of threatened bird, lizard and vegetation species on Pūwheki Beach. The report concluded that very high ecological values are present on Pūwheki Beach and current vehicle access is threatening these values. The Environment Court decision associated with the Northland Regional Plan emphasised that working across agencies is required to ensure the full beach area is managed effectively. The present management has restricted vehicles above the main high water springs with the implementation of the vehicle exclusion zone under the regional plan. So I then go on to discuss the impacts of vehicles on ecological values at Pūwheki Beach. So vehicles have been shown to negatively impact on beaches in published academic literature around the world, and that is noted in a recent review by the Department of Conservation, as well as that very few studies quantify effects on New Zealand flora and fauna. The impacts on birds are difficult to quantify at a population level, but studies have assessed mortality from vehicles and showed that a large number of nest destruction can occur on beaches with vehicle use. Even beaches with low amounts of trackings can have a high proportion of nest destruction shown in those studies. In particular, for the vehicle exclusion zone that's in place, focal bird species such as northern New Zealand dotterels, as well as variable oyster catchers, both have threatened classifications. And both species, their nests are quite cryptic in the sense of they're very hard to spot and when travelling in a vehicle nearly impossible. In terms of being able to spot them, it does require observation of the bird itself to then identify where it is protecting its nest. And its nests are basically depressions in the sand. They're very, very, very hard to spot. When I've worked with such species in projects involving machinery, we've had to undertake steps such as observers and things of the species and markouts to ensure we stay away from nests at times. There's relatively little literature examining the effects of vehicles on dune systems in New Zealand, but the studies do show vehicles negatively affect dune systems and is supported by observations by Boffa for Pūwheki Beach, which as well as observations by myself where we've seen vegetation damaged or absent in areas where vehicle tracking is occurring. Overall, there's an adverse effect of vehicles on threatened vegetation and bird species in the area landward of the main high water spring. And this may be exacerbated by the spread of tracks through the dune systems and shoreline without further regulation. As I mentioned earlier, the recent vehicle exclusion zone below the main high water springs then means that vehicles are pushed into the remaining areas of the beach, which includes that area above the main high water spring, as well as the dune systems themselves. And this then results in fanning of tracks because of the nature of vehicle users. In my opinion, to maintain and protect the very high ecological values associated with the dunes, vegetation and birds present at Pūwheki Beach, further management of vehicles is required. Then go on to the benefits of the relief sought. So Lucklaw Farms seeks relief in the form of provisions that provide for permitted access under certain conditions. Supporting this submission is an amended set of provisions based on the Northland Regional Plan Vehicles on Beaches rule. The provisions suggested by Lutlaw Farm would limit vehicle access to Pūwheki Beach through the implementation of a vehicle exclusion zone and limit vehicle access outside of the vehicle exclusion zone, which is only permitted if conditions 1 to 6 are met. This, along with the vehicle exclusion zone, may reduce the number of vehicles accessing the beach, as well as reducing fanning of tracks on the beach itself. With regard to ecological protection, key aspects of these conditions include avoidance of shellfish beds, vegetated areas and bird nesting areas during nesting season, and a requirement to use the closest practical point to the foreshore from the vehicle access point for the launching and retrieval of vehicles as an exception to the vehicle exclusion zone. All of these factors are considered to be ecologically beneficial compared to the current management in place at Pūwheki Beach. Overall, I consider the imposition of these rules would be effective in minimising the spread of vehicle use within the beach, as would be limited to a direct track between the shore and Pūwheki Road entrance, provided compliance is monitored. With respect to residual matters, I consider it with respect to conditions 2 and 5 that it may be difficult to determine and or enforce so this relates to the bird and shellfish beds. As it requires knowledge of the exact location of bird nests as well as shellfish beds, which are very variable in nature, and equally with the bird species as well in terms of where they choose to nest between given seasons. So it may be more beneficial to identify the particular area of the beach where vehicles may be driven, and as a means to provide a clear understanding for parties involved, or alternatively identify a time of year that captures bird nesting season and restricts access during that time. That's the end of my summary of evidence. So if the panel would like to ask any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, we have read your evidence and thank you for that summary. I see you're focusing mainly on birds and vegetation, and you briefly mentioned shellfish beds. I'm just wondering, is it within your area of expertise to give us some evidence on the effect of vehicles on shellfish and other benthic communities within the sand area, the beach area?
Yeah, so at the time, admittedly, I wasn't aware of the notice that Mr. Ryan had submitted relating to where the jurisdiction of Far North District Council now lies, being below the down to the low water springs, in which case that does capture the area that intertidal shellfish are present on Pūwheki Beach, being species of tuatua that are up there and other surf clams. So in particular to those species, they can vary year to year as to whether they may be found in denser beds than others, and so it's not one of those cases where we can map an exact area of bed, but rather they will vary up and down the beach within a zone.
Yeah, I suppose what I'm particularly interested in is do vehicles driving on beaches have an impact on shellfish generally?
Yes.
They recover, or is it a matter of intensity? Can you have a certain number of vehicles where any sort of beds may recover, or is there a cumulative effect? I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah. So there's a number of studies completed around New Zealand on various different species of shellfish, particularly surf clams. Particularly, there's studies around tohuraua. Myself, my thesis on tuatua, southern tuatua, and there are a number of other studies around. The concluding factor is with more intensity of vehicles is you have a higher destruction to shellfish beds, particularly in the intertidal area. The tuatua species tend to sit in the top sort of 5 to 10 mil of sediment from where the vehicle track is. So what I found through my studies was the initial imprint of the vehicle does the most damage. So your first pass tends to do the most damage, and then the sand starts to compact as more and more vehicles go through the same track. In terms of how that relates to general vehicle use, what tends to happen is people don't tend to always follow the same tracks, and so there ends up that fanning effect, and so that actually becomes more damaging than if the vehicles were to stay in the same tracks following one after another, because it's effectively spreading the effect with that greater compaction occurring. So overall, the conclusion that I had in my thesis in Store of the View is that vehicles, if we to continue use on an intertidal zone, you'd want them to follow the exact tracks, at one set of tracks, and the fanning is where a lot of the damage starts to exacerbate.
And have you looked at places, I mean, like 90 Mile Beach is the obvious one where you're expecting vehicles to drive. There be much study on an area like that where it appears to have, a lot of repeated use, including buses, I think.
Yeah, I believe there are some studies on Toharoa up 90 Mile. I haven't done them myself, but there were some studies that have been done up there. Another one on Toharoa is there's been studies undertaken around the Burt Munro racing that occurs down there. And they do find a high proportion, particularly with it's that pattern of increased use results in increased damage to the shellfish beds.
Right, thank you. I'll see if some of the other commissioners have any questions for you.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor, for your evidence. I'm just interested, have you got any information on studies on beaches where vehicles have been removed, and has the ecology improved over time since that point?
Yeah, no, I don't. Oh, I believe there may be one recent study actually. I think it's around. Yeah, I not front of mind, but I think there is one recent study associated with where vehicle use has changed recently as a result of physical changes from the earthquakes around Kaikoura. But otherwise, yeah, a lot of policy is yet to sort of flow through to the point that vehicles are removed from beaches in New Zealand to then study the positive effects that may occur.
Anecdotally, I come from Muriwai Beach in Auckland, and we have vehicles on our beach, but during COVID, when the beach was closed, it was pretty obvious to me that lots of bird life came back and nature was doing its thing without vehicles being in the way. So it's a bit of a no-brainer almost, is it?
Yeah, well, that's it. As you remove the stressor, in this case being vehicles, then it would be reasonable to expect that. And equally with bird life, there are studies that have quantified the impact of nests, showing that even a relatively small use of vehicles will result in a high proportion of ground-based nests getting destroyed.
Thank you.
Just to add another question to that, is there any correlation between the compression of vehicles and its effect on shellfish and then the valuable food sources for seabirds?
Sorry, I'm just so the compression of the vehicles on the shellfish and then how that relates to food source for.
Yes, I mean, is there a correlation between the two?
Not too much. The main thing I did observe when I was doing those sort of compression tests, if you like, was the seabirds do follow the vehicle tracks, and then use that as an opportunity to peck and find the shellfish. So that is one thing I have observed, but I'm not aware of any studies that have gone to conclusively prove it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your submission. So just to clarify, you only looked at Puhiki Beach?
From the point of view of yes, this evidence, yes.
Okay, so the scope is just about Puhiki Beach? Is that the only beach that the submission relates to?
Yes.
Okay. That was all, just clarifying
Great. Okay, so any more questions? Okay, we haven't got any further questions for you. So again, thank you very much for your primary statement, your summary, and the answers to our questions.
Thank you all.
I think you'll be standing by if any residual questions might come your way. So, yeah.
Commissioner Stuart Ryan here. If I could just jump in at this point before introducing John Sturgis. So the relief sought in the submission is for a district-wide rule, but the evidence and matters within the submitter's knowledge relates to Puwheki Beach. But to be clear, the relief sought is for a district-wide rule.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
If I could just turn to Mr. Sturgis. So John Sturgis, by way of introduction, tells me that he started his work career as a engineer's mate, and later obtained a degree in engineering. John Sturgis and his wife are owners of Lucklaw Farm, which I've referred to earlier in my submissions. There's a statement of evidence before you dated the 2nd of August. And if I could ask Mr. Sturgis just to confirm the contents of that. And if
Yes, I can confirm it.
and I'd like, just in the interest of time, if that statement could be taken as read, and Mr. Sturgis will speak to 2 or 3 of the photographs in the selection of materials in front of you, as well as archaeological sites or heritage sites which are present on the property.
Okay, thank you very much. So yes, good morning, Mr. Sturgis, and welcome. As you are not an expert, you are entitled to read out your submissions, but your evidence, sorry, but you have pre-circulated, we have read it, so we are happy to take that as read. Otherwise, we're in your hands as to what you want to show us.
Morena, to you, panel. The overview of the area is probably the best place to start, where you've probably seen the photos of the Rangaunu Harbour, then you have the lake, the Rotokawa Lakes, and then you have the Waimango Swamp. And it's those 3 bodies of water and the beaches, Puhiki Beach, which is an important food source for those birds, that are the initial driver. The land was Crown land at the Pūwheki Hill, which has often a spiritual significance, being a wheke. And I note in your room, in the mural behind you, you seem to have wheke type characters at either end there, where you have the multiple arms of the octopus, which is quite a common theme. And so the land there that was the blocks that we hold, blocks 3 and 4, which are those where you've seen were subdivided during the First World War, and the road to the area was kept deliberately short of the beach, and that may have been just a result of wartime and invading troops being kept at bay. But the effect was that the area had very little vehicle presence until the early 70s, when an interesting transaction took place where the district council managed to put a road in on the basis of a big subdivision project that was going to go ahead at the Rangipuri farmland owned by the Crown. The Crown did buy the land back again, though, as part of the Conservation Act purchases, and that is when the hill was bought back. And it also it looked at buying blocks 3 and 4, and it looked at buying Waimango Swamp area. But in the end decided that the Waimango was the more important one because their budgets were limited. And their paperwork shows that 3 and 4, it was a very difficult block because it had been in forestry, and forestry then basically ends up with gorse happening after it. And so the Waimango Swamp was the chosen one to go with it. And it's been left up to the owners of the property, and the key owner that was always instrumental in protecting the area was the headland owners. That was I think a law clerk family that were in Whangarei, and there's lots of evidence of him under the old public, I think the Harbour Boards Act, trying to slow down the vehicles that were coming more and more onto the beaches over time. And then the owner of blocks 3 and 4, that was a man called Ashley Beresford, who purchased those blocks when he was, I think, New Zealander of the Year, and then went about planting out large areas of damaged area and bush, and really all we've done is taking over these blocks is continue to try and understand the resource of that area and try to figure out what is the way forward for it that fits with all the parties, the councils, of course, the local iwis and families that live in the area, and not only that, but the whole of New Zealand as well. We understand that it's quite a responsibility. The beach itself is basically if you start at that, over at the eastern end with the public access with their vehicles, is an area where historically the public, which is mainly locals and in times gone by, tended to track through the dunes. That's because the dunes were very much at high tide, right down to the high tide level, that 4 dune area. So you could only access the beach in that area at mean high tide and lower. And the tracks are visible. I think you can see them in my statement. They're even marked on topo maps. But that in itself was probably what helped protect the beach again for many years. But we then ended up, as you notice, with a big reset of everything during the lockdown periods. I can agree with the fact that we noticed in the short period of only, I think it was 4 weeks, when the beach was completely closed, a massive amount of nature coming out that we'd never really seen before. And even thresher sharks just repeatedly having their babies right in the shallows, which is obviously something that they only do at night. But moving on anyway, that the beach then got changed after COVID, and I think it was actually in response to an RMA requirement that in outstanding natural characters, you can't have vehicle tracks. And so they decided to then close off these vehicle lines, which were very much only capable of being navigated by the serious off-road type vehicles of the day, because they were largely, the sand out there quickly goes to bull dust, and your tyres sink in if not compacted, as Gareth mentioned to you. It does compact well, particularly in the wetter periods of the year, but this bull dust, when it's a dry period, is quite hard to navigate. But the beach, especially if you can then drive at the mid-tide and low tide, is even all-wheel drive vehicles and even two-wheel drives, if they can get onto the beach, can navigate it. So just starting at the eastern end, that's a lot of weeds have come in through the vehicle tracks though, and I see the regional council have a group there that do transects over the area, monitoring the progress of the weeds coming down through those eastern end dunes. And then it changes to the middle. The middle area is the main wetlands area where the bird life likes to feed. And I'll take you to some photos of that in there. And those wetlands then carry through the farmland and into the lakes, and particularly in the little lake on the eastern side there's a large swamp area which is all farmland, which has been recognised for many years as quite a special area. And Ashley had actually planted out the surrounding areas and the natives in there. So you can see quite a lot of natives that are a continual need for management because of the wattle issue and the fact the wattles and gorse will still outgrow them. And so that's probably the big focus for us as farm managers is there. But that whole wetland area, and the wetland acts are in now, and we have to follow those, and we are doing our best to do so. But it's these birds then track out, as you can see on, I don't know whether you can see the slide that's up, can they?
They can see the area of farm.
Yes, property. So yeah. You can see in the middle of the beach where the creek exits onto the beach, and at high tide, and particularly in the spring high tides, the salt water can lap into the end of that area there. So it's truly one of these intertidal areas where it's fantastic feeding for the bird life, and it's also fantastic for the eel life. The native eels come through there twice, at least once a year. I think we see it in May that they come through, or maybe October again. And all through, as long as the sand can close off, those eels breed heavily through that creek that runs through the farm, and then they release again the next winter as the high tides and the storm surges come through and open up the path. And that's particularly helps some of the native birds. I've forgotten what's the names of. Anyway, there's birds that really, the native birds love those little eels. It's a real easy capture. and you can see them, you can hear them honking through the summer months as they call each other. And then you end up into the western end where there's a big dune field. This dune field is nothing to do with the beach itself in today's presence, but these dune fields are from when the sea was about 4 meters higher, and they were basically just a bar that formed from the fact that the headlands are intrusive igneous rocks, and they set up these sand spits that essentially ran right back down to Mount Pūwheki, and the area would have flooded all those lowland areas, and that's about, I think, 4,000 years ago that event happened. And the main dune of the beach was actually right up against the lakes. There's an area there of intrusives that create that barrier. And then further over, you get where the effects of the previous owner then managed to maintain those headland areas, and it's actually is still in very good shape, those areas there. And I see all the councils have issued us with a permit to remove the wilding pines on that, and another permit to keep a track of another area on the headland. So the district council actually have us permitted to work on the dunes, and we have a relationship with them at a ground level on how we carry those out. But these are very, very pristine, and I know they're of an interest to everybody out there who follows those sort of things.
Could I just mention, John, in your evidence you refer to the farm being subject to a number of archaeological sites, and could I just orientate the panel to pages 48 and page 47 of the submitter's bundle material, and at page 47, which I think is showing on the screen at the moment, is a copy of recorded archaeological sites which extend into the dune area, and there's also a couple of sites closer to the water edge on the eastern side of the farm property. So these are sites which are not regulated by any bylaw, so people can drive over them, and there's no effective RMA rule or bylaw rule which is regulating use of this area, which is acknowledged to have archaeological significance. John, is that something that you manage in conjunction with Poheri Taonga, historic places? How does that work?
These are areas, I think I put that in my statement, that these are areas that we all follow closely, and there's I don't really have the authority to talk about what is there in a forum like this, but I'm sure if you talk to Heritage New Zealand and Kerry, they could assist you there.
Right.
But we do notice in terms of the public, it is a real problem where you get people from the public who believe that they can walk through these areas and picking up things all the time, and because they're of interest. And probably every weekend we'll see 4 or 5 things disappear from the areas, which we monitor the ones that are quite close to the homestead when we're not working, and back we'll go down and ask them. But the public have changed, and they're no longer public that are reasonable people. Essentially, they can look up their phone and they can see land that you own and GPS themselves exactly on, and they can be quite aggressive back towards you. So the world is changing dramatically in how people feel empowered to be able to carry out these activities.
So that's evidence for Mr. Sturgis. the panel may have some questions for Mr. Sturgis, or we could turn to Steve Sanson, recognising that time's a factor.
Yes, I understand that. Firstly, well, thank you very much for your evidence, Mr. Sturgis, and I think we just want to recognise your ethic of kaitiaki taonga and stewardship on this particular piece of land and coastal environment. So thank you very much for your efforts there. Just a specific question. So I was looking on Google Maps. Does the public road actually extend to the beach?
Well, that's an area of contention, because when the land was surveyed, and I think it's 1914, the area of the marginal strip was shaded pink, and so the pink was a certain thing at that time, and I've managed to get the Gazette notices that relate to it, but it was to make sure that people didn't, before that, everything had been coloured sepia, that was land reserved from sale. But the pink was a new method of, essentially, it's the original town planning, I guess, that said that should not have vehicles on that land. And because this land, these blocks 3 and 4 are still essentially intact, never been resurveyed, and the boundary lines that enable people like Doc and the others to adjust to more modern information has never been able to occur. So we're essentially legally sitting in a 1914 environment, and so the car park is sort of recognised that only happened because there was a period where the road that went up onto the mountain, there was an attempt to take it off there, and then the graded driver who came along Ōmāpere Road could no longer turn and go up the hill and then use the turnaround at the top of the hill. So he just pushed through, obviously, onto the dune and started turning there, I think in the 80s, which is around that period. And then that was still, people, it was quite, never had metal on it. You could still get stuck quite easily. But then since lockdown and since the establishment of a new rock wall guiding people onto the beach, and the council been putting a lot of road metal out there, that area has been colonised, but still the track through to the beach goes through Dock Reserve land. And Dock obviously have the concept that they run with the Department of Conservation Act that says not clear where public access and where conservation take priority. And if the council are going to line them up and tell them to go across that land, especially when I think the area is now by the Kaitaia office and under the Te Apori, watching management of it, it's effectively still just a free-for-all. But I do know that government vehicles never go down that track. So it's quite clearly that they are aware of that they're breaking the law. But you often see the council using the local people effectively as their agents to bash the road. And there's been substantial erosion on that road over the last 2 years. In fact, they've cut a new track just over the last 6 months down onto the beach. And it's extremely dangerous because as you come through out to the beach, there's only one lane and it's essentially 10-metre high cliffs either side. And so to get across that soft sand, people go very quickly, and it's going quickly into a blind corner. And we have seen several quite bad accidents, and we have raised that with the district council as an issue.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. I mean, just as an observation, there is a big difference between a marginal strip and an esplanade reserve, but I think a lot of people in the public don't understand what they are. Sorry, do you have trouble hearing me?
I'm sorry, yeah, I'm quite deaf. So
I was saying, I was saying that there is a big difference between a marginal strip and an esplanade reserve, but the public seem to think that marginal strips are sort of just like another form of esplanade reserve.
Yes, well, in fact, they're quite different. And, you know, and what's clear about marginal strips is you can't pick anything up. It's an old 1948 Land Act, and even a bit of wood on the marginal strip is Crown property, and theft of Crown property in those acts is taken very seriously.
Yeah. Okay, no, thank you very much for that clarification, and we may be undertaking a site visit to this property, so I'm sort of going to advance signal that we would like to come out there, and perhaps so we can engage with you on how to access these areas appropriately, and perhaps see all the things that have been set out in your statements of evidence.
Yeah, we'd be happy to host you, no problem.
Okay, well, Mr. Ryan, we'll move on to, is it the planning witness next?
Can I ask?
Oh, sorry, we have another question.
Thank you. Yeah, just a question. I know your submission relates to, there's quite a bit in here about enforcement. And there's one thing making the rules, but there's another thing that, you know, once the rules are made for council to enforce them. And I don't know the rest of the panel, but I'm familiar with the area. As well, in terms of DOC and regional council, I'm not sure what effectiveness of their methods they've been enforcing or not with the rules that they've created. But district council, if we chose to make this, would have to enforce these rules. And I'm just wondering about how, in your mind, council would do that physically. Yes, and also the evidence that you've got here, to me, looks like it relates to Puhiki Beach, but then I think your legal counsel there has identified that what you're proposing is a rule for quite a number of more beaches that haven't had the ecological assessment, and we don't have maps of all of those. Are those going to be tabled with us, or are you just proposing to restrict this only to Puhiki Beach?
Could I answer that question? The regional council has done the work in terms of mapping. The regional council has mapped VEZ beaches. The ecological assessment for that evaluation includes a mapping methodology, which includes various ecological reports that are appended to the mapping methodology for the regional council. So the proposition is to have a district-wide rule. It's evidence-based. The regional council's done the work in respect of mapping. It would fall to the district to map the landward extent, but it's beyond the resources of this submitter to identify and map every beach within the Far North with respect. That is the legal duty of the Far North District Council and arises from policies 20, 13, 15 and the other policies which I've addressed in my submissions. In respect of enforcement, I wonder whether Mr. Stenson might address that, because efficiencies in terms of administration can be the subject of appropriate transfer functions, so that there is one authority that administers the beach profile. And I'd perhaps be grateful if Mr. Sampson could turn his mind to that issue.
Yep, will do. Yeah, so I guess what Mr. Ryan's referring to is transfer of powers that already happens under the current operative plan in terms of wastewater and earthworks activities, bridges, already a relationship there between FNDC and NRC. I think what we're saying in the submission is quite a unique proposition, and we don't have the exact answer of the rule quite drafted up. We don't have it exactly perfect. We're trying to wrap it up so that there is complete coverage between regional council and district councils. But in terms of, I guess, to go specifically to your question, in terms of enforcement, I mean, that happens with every rule. I mean, there are some rules that, that'll be in a district plan. There are some activities where council will never, will have a very small oversight of those activities. because they're literally not on the ground area. I think about vegetation clearance. You're not on every farm, watching every farm that chop down every bit of wood. And so I would sort of link that back similarly to this. You won't have enforcement officers everywhere. And I would say in the Far North District, your main basis for monitoring and enforcement is actually complaints. And that's pretty typical across the country. So that's how I would address that question. Should I go into, I guess, the planning? Is that all right, Stuart? You guys have done that?
Yes, John,
Sorry, I think we might just still have a couple of questions for Mr. Sturgis first.
Can I just have one something?
Yes. I did jump in and
Then we'll move on to the planning evidence.
So just to clarify, the Regional Council Rule C151, conditional use of vehicles on foreshore seabed, only applies to, not to all beaches, but only the beaches that Northern Regional Council listed as vehicle exclusion.
So there's general clause and there's specific areas, but they're only doing it within their jurisdiction, okay? Yeah. So just the regional council area.
So what's being sought is
the same thing for the district council.
For the areas that NRC have mapped as vehicle exclusion areas.
And it's a general rule clause as well. It's the same operation. So generally clauses 1 to 6, and then specifically for those areas mapped. And the rule breakdown is it's permitted if you don't, and then obviously the consent if you do. So that's when you get into those arrangements where, hey, we might be driving through the archaeological sites. There might be sites of significance to Maori. That's where a consent territory would pop up, but then you get the specific exclusions that are already pre-mapped because of their existing attributes.
Okay, I'll have to find the maps because they're not attached to the submission.
Yeah, the mapping report is attached to the
No, because only Pūheke Beach was mapped, not all the other beaches that would be affected by clause 155. So that's right, I'll look at the.
I assume that there's a relevant reference in the RPS schedule.
That's a rule, yeah.
So all of those beaches are mapped in the RPS.
Yeah.
Kia ora, Mr. Sturgis. Thank you for your presentation and your passion in regards to your custodianship in the area. So I'd just like to acknowledge you for that and your observations of how things have been changing over time. I just wanted to ask you if you have any relationships with the local iwi or with iwi in the vicinity.
Yes, I think, iwi are diverse groups, and just who the leaders are at a point in time changes, but certainly there's been a few deaths lately and a changing of the guard. But at the high level, there's a very close relationship because we're neighbours, and like all farmers, there's always a certain boundary issues, but when it comes to the key thing that affects people, and that's your livestock, and your livestock includes, because of the law, all these wild and endangered creatures as well. We all work very well together, and I could name names for you if it would help you, but even at the authority level within those groups, we were one of the main vehicle companies was conducting advertisements on Pūwheki Beach for one of its vehicles, and we all decided that was just too much for any of us to handle, and there was a good collaboration to get rid of that immediately. So really at the sea, and similarly with other issues, fire in particularly is one that affects us all, and we often have meetings, and in fact that the photographs that you can see actually all started with a joint effort to make sure we get rid of the fire areas, and that's the reason why we retain those strips that were actually from an original golf course proposal on the farm, because they are effective fire breaks, and you do have to keep them in good shape to be able to try and stop the fire in the area, because it's a known issue out on the peninsula. And so no, I think it really, the only thing it takes with modern technology, people look at their phones. We notice as soon as they come to the beach, most of the youth get their phone out and take a selfie of themselves and send it to all their friends. And really that gives you a huge strength, because if you can have on those sites just some notification to people of what they can and can't do, I think the education process now is readily available, and it really just needs all the authorities to cooperate. And there is, of course, 30 or 40 people out there that probably are the core offenders, right, that need to be each one talked to nicely. And I think if they got all roles in the kaitiaki side of it, they would all come rapidly on board as well. So it's just a changing of the world and a changing of perspectives. And as you can see in the north, in the Te Hiku area, there's a whole new set of laws and behaviour that is bringing everyone together, and you can feel it at ourselves in that boundary area. So we're only passionate because we can see that there is a solution in sight, and we just need the district council to come on board.
Lovely, thank you. And just thank you for that response, and also just reiterating Mr. Sanson, your planner's comment around section 36 with, you know, potential opportunities of co-management, co-governance, joint agreements, whatever that may be, across agencies, which is fine. But I think another component which you're demonstrating is community solutions. You're on the ground, you guys are there, whether it's iwi, whether it's your big farm and your surrounding neighbours, also have that ability to provide solutions at that community level, because you'll have that experience and that awareness of what works and what doesn't work. So quite encouraging to hear reference to section 36 of the RMA, the transfer of powers. How that would work is always the devil's in the detail, but there's those opportunities with community groups and large landowners such as yourself that have awareness or are great custodians in regards to archaeology, in regards to the environment, the flora and fauna, and et cetera, et cetera. So I do acknowledge your passion and custodianship of your area and the Puhiki Beach as well. Kia ora.
Yeah, I think it's probably, you shouldn't just acknowledge me. It's a lot of it comes through my wife, who has a Maori connection in her family, and has been brought up with very much those sort of values. So I think a lot of credit is due to her, who is unfortunately not here today because she's busy feeding calves and right at that time of the year. So I'd like to take time to recognise her.
Sure. Thank you.
Anybody else got to? Okay. Well, thank you very much. That is all the questions we have for you at this point. We can move on now, Mr. Ryan, for the planning evidence.
Yes, if we could turn to you, Mr. Sanson. So I think the committee has before it a copy of the schedule with tracking, and the committee also has supplied to it the vehicle mapping, which has been generated by the regional council. So if you could turn your mind to any drafting issues that arise and speak to your evidence, please.
Yeah, sure thing. I'll just go straight into the wording, because I think the statutory approach is quite clear from Mr. Ryan. He's made that link between the coastal policy statement and the requirements of this plan quite clear. We've got the localised issues and the ecological issues specific to Puhiki, which are likely to be seen elsewhere. And so I guess turning to the rule and the objectives and policy, I'll go to the rule first because I think it's quite important to just address the breakdown. So it is permitted if you're not driving on a beach with these six requirements. Some of those are, are you coming through legalised entrance, are there any migratory birds? Oh, it's up here, et cetera, et cetera. And then the second component is, well, you actually can't drive on beaches which have been mapped, and so that's where the more extensive mapping that's been relied upon from the regional council is proposed to be used. So I guess the rules in place at the regional council level, our approach is to tweak where we can, try and make it fit the FMDC planning architecture. I think the planning report recommends it's, stick with the bylaw because that's more of an efficient process. But when I see the work that's been done from the regional council, when I see the complete coverage that's available in terms of the issue, there is a strong argument that district plan should be is the more appropriate instrument to manage this. And I think that because when we look at the effects that the RMA can manage, and just the issues we've seen in front of us, it's multifaceted, a beach. It's where coast meets land. It's where people have spent a lot of their time, and that's where we see the mixture of ecology, culture, heritage. And you've seen a lot of that example in terms of Pūhiki Beach, where, I think I saw more pink dots than anything else on that beach, just showing the level of archaeology there. So, in the NRC rule used, I guess the architecture of that has been through a tested process. It's come out of a consent order. I would say it's well drafted, subject to the changes we have tracked. And then to backfill that, we simply are offering, objectives and policies so they have the correct cascade, the coastal environment. We've got no other zones to rely upon here. This is the only area we can establish a rule framework. And yes, there'll be some consequential changes perhaps to the natural open space zone, because that's the interface between the beach and then those marginal strips that our team have been talking about. So for me, it's an appropriate approach to manage the issue. That's the summation of my evidence. We did talk about, enforcement and how bloody hard is this going to be, excuse my French, from the council side. Let's just be real, it could be quite a hard thing to do, but there are a lot of hard things to do. There are opportunities to work with the regional council to make the process less hard, in terms of enforcement or actual management, but equally you're taking on a lot of other hard topics within the district plan. And there's a statutory requirement to do it. So I think I'll leave it there and happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Sanson. I mean, a coastal interface and the jurisdictional interface between regional and district council is it's a difficult one. And there are certainly clear jurisdictional boundaries between what the regional council does and the district council does. But this interface here, particularly vehicles on beaches, is somewhere where it seems to make sense that you could have a consistent approach in both instruments, where there possibly is a clear overlap of functions. You've got vehicles coming from land onto the intertidal area, where you're between high water springs and low water springs, which is a little bit of a no man's land in terms of who governs it. So I can understand the approach taken, and you're working with an existing rule, right, and just wanting to adapt it for a planning instrument. Looking at how it's sort of set out, it sort of reads like a self-enforcing rule, and it would appear that any person who would take advantage of this rule and use it would obviously have a reasonable understanding of beach sensitivity. Like, for example, no disturbance or damage to indigenous or migratory bird nesting or roosting sites. You're expecting, people in four-wheel drives to literally understand what a bird nesting and roosting site is. And if you go back to the evidence, Dr. Taylor, is that, it can literally be a depression in the sand. But it almost begs the question that there needs to be education going on here as well. Because, you know, you look at those photos of twins in four-wheel drives doing donuts on the beach. It's those guys that need to be educated about how this rule would be put in force. And you're right, at the end of the day, enforcement comes down to someone like Mr. Sturgis getting on the phone and ringing the district or regional council saying there's hoons on the beach doing wheelies. And of course then, so they're doing wheelies, the council then needs to call an enforcement officer who needs to get there within sufficient time to catch them doing that, because 9 times out of 10, they're gone. And then when you have the vehicle tracks, and so I suppose that's part of the sort of wider general enforcement. But it seems to me that there's an education component that's for a self-enforcing rule. That'd be fair to say.
Yeah, that would be fair to say.
And if you go through the list, yeah, you're expecting people to understand, you know, what an archaeological site might look like, what a midden might look like, a cockle bed or a pippy bed. And to be honest, I'm not really sure. I mean, well, having said that, if anybody read this rule, they would probably, you'd hope they'd say, well, I just won't drive my vehicle on the beach because there are all these things that I might damage.
I would agree. I would, yeah, just my mind goes to an example that I was involved in at Tūnanoa Tohi. And I guess it's a different framework because it was brought together through settlement legislation, but yeah, they did canvass the issue, but yeah, they did focus a lot on that education component, and it was the speeds on beaches, and there's a lot more of a health and safety element which you could bring in. For the various beaches, you know, it would be, I think, what one of the commissioners here was referring to does take a bit of a community approach as well to it. You know, there's always the carrot and the stick, and you know, in cases like this, the carrot can be useful, but yeah, again, without the stick, you know, having a good hui and a talk all the time, I guess just leads to, you know, the likes of Mr. Sturgis going around in circle because there's no stick at the end of the day.
Yeah, and also you're trying to control vehicles on beaches, and it seems to me that there are probably a number of methods to help enforcement, you know, like cameras, capturing number plates, or members of the public reporting number plates. And that's where I think perhaps the community enforcement role may come in. And I suspect there's possibly a role for signage, but clear, I don't know, is there a sign at the car park saying don't drive your car on the beach? Or?
I'm not sure about this specific one, but I'll go back to it because I did work on the beach management plan, and signage was a big
because that's helpful with enforcement, isn't it? Because if there's a clear sign saying, you know, you're not permitted on this beach unless blah blah blah, or you're just not permitted, and then they're caught on the beach. There's you know, I'm maybe going to Mr. Ryan's area, but it seems to me your defence might be a little bit limited. Yeah. Okay, I'll see if anybody else has any questions for you, but thank you for the effort you put into this stuff. I can understand the logic of wanting to duplicate this rule across both jurisdictions.
No, that's a pretty effective presentation, thanks. I can see the influence of a town planner amongst the presentation.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Steve. Just brought up the map of the whole district that shows, I went on the NRC website to find the whole district and where all these vehicle exclusion areas are, and it's quite a large area of the district, particularly because of, you know, how much coastline we have. So by doing this, it sort of sees the scale of how enforcement will have to be done. I think as well, from someone who lives at a beach and has spent all of her life at a beach, and particularly Ōmāpere, who has giant coastlines, Te Ōmāpere Tohi, driving on the beach is what everybody does every day, where I live, and you know, where you've all come to, Te Tai Tokoro. So I think in terms of culture and normalised activities, that's something that our community has always done. Just highlighting from yourself, and you may have a response comment, that because this is part of district plan processes and isn't an individual publicly notified bylaw like driving on beaches, people may feel like they've been excluded from the process and may be unaware about what the implications of this might be to them in the community if this was to go ahead for the whole district. Not just Puhiki Beach, which the submission focused on. Do you have any comments about that and not allowing the public to be part of that process like they were for the bylaw, and only one beach got excluded from that, compared to this process where you've come in at this stage and requesting all of the beaches to be excluded and to be enforced under the district plan where abatement notices may apply and enforcement teams may be needed?
I just agree with the Schedule 1 process of the RMA. And so that's quite sufficient, I would think, where this submission's been out there. There's only a couple of further submissions, and if I guess if the council don't like it, they can appeal it. I mean, that's, or if we get an answer that is acceptable to us, and approves a rule change, then I guess we've got to follow the Schedule 1 process. I mean, I think that's as fair as we're going to get.
It's already a rule, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a rule in the regional council.
Yeah, so I think what you're asking is the rule that already applies in the regional plan is effectively duplicated, for want of a better word, replicated in the plan, in the district planning instrument. Is that right?
Correct.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. Just to clarify in my mind, so if we're just looking at Puhiki without going wider, and there would be rule number 7, clause 7 of that rule that kicks in, right?
Yeah, if it was within a map zone.
Yeah, so the map has to happen and vehicle exclusion zone has to be mapped to make it work. So let's say all that's in place. Could you put a gate at the end of the road like they did at Ōmāpere Beach, where they used to have vehicle access on there, and now there's a gate and it's got a lock and a key on it, so people that do need to access the beach for whatever reason, which is the A, B, C to G, can go through. And I know that you've got here boat, the launching or retrieval of vessels, which is B. So a fishing club could still have access to the beach with gates, keys, and then they've got rules about how they drive on the beach and where they park and all that sort of thing. Is that an option? Could that be something that comes out of it?
I'd say there'd be a ton of permutations similar to that. But I guess the rule doesn't know who owns the land, whether they can put a gate up, whether they can do all of this education and wider arrangements. All I guess it's trying to do is say, okay, for this reason, these specific areas shouldn't have vehicles unless, and it gives people the option to carry out those activities, health and safety, carrying out monitoring, conservation. So there's a range of steps where it is appropriate in those areas. But I don't think it gets into, should we put an arm bar across the land at Puhiki?
It doesn't get into that detail, but it's something that could come through, potentially.
Potentially, yeah.
Okay.
Stuart Ryan here, just chipping in briefly. I can just comment briefly that the consent order before the Environment Court was adjourned for several months to allow for the regional council to consult with Hapu and iwi, and that engagement with Hapu and iwi occurred before the NRC rule was approved by the Environment Court. So there was a process that was followed there, which the regional council carried out before the court's consent order. in terms of sort of the operational issues of signage and the like, could I just briefly comment that, of course, the district has control of signage through public roads, but the signage needs to respond to a rule or a direction or a restriction, and that restriction doesn't exist absent any bylaw control. So that's what we're hoping to achieve, having a restriction which would then encourage the district to erect signage, etc., and carry out education and the other items which are acknowledged. So that's the case for the submitter. Mr. Chairman, you've got a road ahead of you, and there may be a few twists and turns. The submitter, for its part, is happy to engage with council officers in respect of any rule drafting, if the committee was of a mind.
Yeah, thank you. And I think we're seeing Blacklaw Farms Limited and further hearings going forward. Is that right?
Yes, there are some additional zoning issues which I think will fall for next year.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think yeah. So thank you for that offer, and there may be an opportunity for some conferencing or further engagement. So thank you for that. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. I think we're bang on time, so you've used the time quite well.
Mr. Chair,
yes,
wondering if we could request a couple of points of clarification from the submitter. So,
yeah, well, I was going to say we've got 10 minutes before we're actually going to have the adjournment. So
Sorry, we've got another submission, final holdings before lunch, but we'll have to push lunch.
Okay, sorry, I've gotten a little bit ahead of myself as usual. Yes, I mean, we had a lot of material put through, and I think it may be appropriate for allowing the officers some clarification. So how much time do you think you need?
probably 2 minutes, if that's it.
Oh, that's fine. Well, I think we'll allow that. Yeah.
Obviously, the submitter has pointed to a model in the Bay of Plenty. There are a number of district councils with coastline in the Bay of Plenty, and I was wondering whether there was a similar district plan set of provisions that they could point officers to that we could examine.
Yes, I think that sounds fair and reasonable. Did you hear that, Mr. Ryan?
Yes, I did. I'm not sure of the answer to that. I don't know if there's an equivalent district rule. I think from the Bay of Plenty that it's the regional council taking the charge. The issue, however, in Far North is the absence of a rule above Mean High Springs, and so that's why we're inviting the district to fill the gap, basically.
Yeah. Okay. So are you able to perhaps, Mr. Saint, you could come up with that rule and just give it to the council officers, so they could do a control. I assume you want to look at how they approach the rule and how it's been drafted up here, and perhaps. Well, I think the proposition that's been put to you is that that the rule, if you did apply a rule at the district plan level, that it should mirror the regional rule as much as possible.
We will examine it when we've.
But I suppose you need to look at all the material to have an objective answer, so that'll be fine. Okay, thank you.
And just one final point of clarification, whether the submitters were aware of the relevant bylaws that apply and whether they were engaged in that process.
Did you hear that question posed through the chair?
Yes, I did, sir. So Mr. Sturgis touches on this in his statement, and Mr. Sturgis and 60 others were submitters to the Far North bylaw review in 2022, and the outcome of that was that people were told that the district wasn't going to engage on a rule in relation to vehicles on beaches through the bylaw process. And there's a statement to that effect in Mr. Sturgis's statement, and there's various, there's a couple of documents in the bundle at tab 16, page 86, and tab 17, page 87 of the bundle material, which refer to the bylaw review process. So, in other words, the submitter and others sought the same outcome through the bylaw review, and the outcome was only Cooper's Beach was restricted. So if not a bylaw, you know, where is it controlled? John, is that accurate summary?
Oh, I think, yeah, I was submitter 4 if you ever want to read through the full write-up, and you can see that the actual position it said I was supporting at the end of the report was that there should be no rules on the beach, which is completely turned around what I was submitting on. So there was definitely confusion, and I think it's exactly as was stated. Driving on beaches is a culture in the far north, and it's not an easy one to tackle. But that said and done, most of the beaches on Kari already you can't drive on the peninsula, and they are very successfully held off by barriers and chains. And in all cases, the local landowner who is surrounding that is empowered to make sure it is retained that way. And Tokerau Beach is the sort of accepted at this stage anyway as the beach that people can enjoy driving on. So it's the issue becomes Pūwheke, where it's so pristine and it's just such an exceptional, wonderful thing driving your vehicle on a beach. It is quite a buzz. And it's just one, though, that future generations have a right to enjoy as well.
Got any further clarification questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, no, thank you very much for that. And so thank you very much for your presentation. Now, we have, I thought we were on time, but I realised that Arnold Holdings have yet to give their submissions and evidence before our lunch break. And I see that's you, Mr. Sanson. I think what we'd like to do is actually take a half-hour lunch break now and then recommence at 1:30 with Arnold Holding rather than break you in the middle. It means that we sort of keep pretty much to the schedule, and we'll see. We don't want to put your client under any duress or time restrictions. Are you happy with that? Just waiting a half-hour break now and then coming back at 1:30? Yeah. Right, okay, so we'll adjourn, take a half-hour break. Sorry for the short lunch break, council officers, but we've got an extra hour at the end of the day, but I suspect we'll be chewing right into that. So anyway, we're adjourned until 1:30.
Stopping the recording now.